Hi, and welcome to another episode of the Climate Economics Podcast. And right now, there is a lot of debate going on about EU climate policy, especially the European Union's emission trading system. Now, the EU ETS was the world's first carbon market. In episode 11 with Jos Cozijnsen, we covered how it was created, the challenges it faced early on, and how it gradually became operational. Now, in 2026, the system is up for review again. And recently, emission permits have been volatile, energy prices have been politically sensitive, and there are sometimes growing calls to change parts of the system. But it can be hard to tell what reflects a real policy momentum and what is mostly just signaling. So I wanted to speak with an expert to try to figure out what is going on right now with EU climate policy. So I'm happy today to have Jos Cozijnsen as a guest. And Jos is a Dutch lawyer and longtime expert on carbon markets and international climate policy. He was part of the Dutch delegation to the United Nations climate negotiations in the 1990s, including Kyoto Conference in 1997, and has worked for decades on emissions trading, Article 6 of the Paris Agreement, and both regulatory and voluntary carbon markets. Over the years, he has advised governments, NGOs, and private organizations, including the Environmental Defense Fund, and he remains closely involved in current debates on the future of carbon market design. Jos, welcome to the podcast.
Hi, Ive. It's good to be here.
I am very excited about today's conversation because I have noticed I'm sometimes confused about what's going on. So, what's going on right now with EU climate policy?
Yeah, well, it is following what's happening in the world, the geopolitics. So, climate change policies enhancement is in a difficult situation, economics, because of geopolitics. Then there's the wars going on in Ukraine and in the Middle East that has impact. And of course, it remains political. So some powers will say, hey, this is a good chance to weaken everything, uh, or is it a chance to strengthen anything? It remains always political. But I always try to follow this issue very neutral, in the middle, cool down. ETS is here to stay, and it can serve all kind of problems you see.
And when people talk about the EU ETS review, like what do they actually mean? Like what is actually being reviewed?
Yeah, that's also political. Some say, the ETS should be reviewed, should be revisited. But the review was already part of the deal. It's part of the legislation. It needs to be reviewed after several years. So that has to be done. And you could say that if you would have followed the past and then to see how the ETS will progress, tighten further, then it's a straight line. But now the review will take also a look on what's happening in geopolitics. So that's why the review will be a little bit different than we first thought. We thought it will be strengthened, and now it needs to be more flexible. So this review is a chance to meet current problems.
And when people talk about weakening or strengthening, is it mostly through the emission allowances that are going to be sold? Like, I think this is like linear reduction factor, which says how fast are we going to reduce the amount of emissions that we give to industries? Are they talking about this in particular?
Yeah, so people that are really worried about climate, they want to see when companies will stop emitting, the real zero. That's what they want to see. And they see the ETS as a way to maybe delay or to weaken. And if they think that the actual end of real emissions is becoming later, then they see that as a weakening. But as we will speak together, there are all kind of flexibilities that will prove that the overall impact is still strong. So weakening is for most people, oh, okay, the fossil-free world will take more time. And another part might be, in the current situation, as we will talk about in a minute, the green companies with less CO2 intensity has even a lot of advantages at the moment due to geopolitics. And so they see every way to soften that a bit, to correct the real developments, also as a weakening because it's bad for the greens. Huh? On the other hand, the more intensive companies, they have more damage due to geopolitics, and that needs to be softened. So some say every movement downwards in ambition, they see that as a weakening, and this shows this is very political.
And maybe we can even take a step back because I read on your site that you actually posted an article on the recent EU climate amendment that was passed recently on
Remember?
March 5th.
Yeah.
Actually, like as it says, it was an amendment. So could you maybe talk about what was decided in
I'm
that?
so glad you asked that, because that important decision, it was adopted by the ministers last December, and now finally adopted with the European Parliament in March. Indeed, that didn't get any news at all. The news we got in March was, the CSDDD is weakening. Companies don't need to make a climate transition plan, for example. But in the same moment, this agreement was adopted, which helps the EU for their 2040 targets. And in that, package, you might say, there are some decisions taken with regard to the ETS review, how that needs to be adapted. And then only a few days later, there was a lot of fuzz by Boss F and the Italians and the Germans, as if they say we need to change the complete ETS. But if you look behind the lines, what they were referring to was almost really what was already adopted. And it was very interesting. So all these guys say we can say something strong and we will get it anyway, or maybe it was not understood. Anyway, it's worthwhile to discuss, because indeed in that package agreed adopted in March, a lot was already said with regard to ETS. So let's discuss that indeed.
Exactly. Maybe we start with the fact that so carbon removals were introduced, and then they could be integrated in the EU ETS. There was some like flexibility on the car package. EU
Yeah,
ETS two. Could you speak to that?
yeah, yeah. Let's let's walk along all those elements indeed. Um, First, the Commission is asked to develop, while reviewing the ETS, a possibility to have emissions after 2039, a limited amount. Oh, that's a big change already, because we were assuming that there will be no more emissions, because no more allowances after 2039. So the Commission has asked revisit it so that we will have allowed emissions after 2039. So that's one. That means, yeah, or weakening the reduction factor, the annual reduction of available allowances, or other ways. So that's one. And second is the Commission needs to consider to let the let to the free allocation for industries longer. So to phase out, no, to slow the phase out of free allowances. So that's the second ask. And the third ask was indeed the adoption, more or less, that the ETS will be linked to European carbon removals, the official certificates, permanent removals, at least for the hard to abate sectors. So that's the fourth one. And the fourth one is the linkage to the global carbon market, but in an indirect way, as I see this. So the EU as a whole gets a chance for, after 2036, to use international carbon credits through Article 6 of the Paris Agreement, to use that to meet the overall 2040 target for 5%. So that means 85% has to be reduced in the EU and 5% outside through carbon credits. That's not a direct link with the ETS, but what you already hear now and then the Commission say is that, well, because we allow ourselves more flexibility as the EU as a whole, maybe that extra space for emissions can be exchanged into allowances for the ETS. So this shows it's a large plate of flexibilities, and we don't know exactly what it will mean in the total reductions, the total real price. But I really like the way that they have summed up various flexibilities in that package already, and the Commission has to develop that. And we will also talk about some recent news about the MSR, the Stability Reserve. That was an old thing. You talked about that, I think, with Jos Cozijnsen.
Yeah.
That the Stability Reserve is meant to take in the oversupply of allowances in the market. So every year, the Commission checks how much allowances are on the market.
Maybe Jos, maybe could you just explain again what the MSR is? Because it was a very popular episode, but maybe not everybody knows why the Market Stability Reserve was developed and why it's now a point of contention.
Yep. So after the financial crisis after 2008, we had an oversupply of allowances. And the Commission kept on auctioning those allowances. So that made the price drop even further along the years. And with regard to the market stability reserve system, that means that every year the Commission will check how much allowances are circulating on the carbon market. So, how much emissions did we have? How much allowances do those companies need to surrender? And how much emissions allowances do we need to keep on the market for its liquidity? And if there's more allowances on the market circulating than 733 million, then part of the oversupply, if you can say, will be less auctioned. So they will more or less disappear from the market. So every year the oversupply was shortened and it's now gone. So that was the function of the market stability reserve, to get rid of the oversupply. In the recent years, for example, during Corona, in the Corona time, we had less production, less energy use, less emissions, so less use of allowances. And then after this first year of Corona, the Commission was indeed seeing that there was already enough allowances still circulating on the carbon market. So the next year, the second Corona year, less allowances were auctioned. That means that the price remains stable. And the year later, the same happened. So in the recent years, the market stability reserve was actually, useful to prevent new oversupply. And then after Corona, the economy was increasing again, more emissions, and that led to a little bit more allowances, so that there's enough allowances circulating. So that's the basis of the MSR, the market stability reserve. It works. The price is more. There's stability. Of course, the price is always following demand and supply, but also the weather, the politics, the crazy ideas of traders. You never know. But on the long term, it keeps its stability, and it also slowly tightening the available allowances. Because indeed, as I said, if in a certain year there's a lot of innovation, a lot of subsidies, there will be less emissions, so you need less allowances. So more will be left over on the market. So that means the year later, less will be auctioned. So this is just an extra button to tighten the ETS after a while. Now, if you go look at today, the Commission last week presented this first proposal to loosen the ETS impact a little bit by saying, well, we have the market stability reserve, and we hit the rule that after a while, because if you keep on auctioning less and less and less, the MSR is filling up. Huh? And the idea is that if the MSR has more than 400 million ton of allowances available, the oversupply in the MSR will be gone, will be invalidated. Well, okay, that rule is gone. That means those allowances will stick in that MSR for eventual issuance on the carbon market. What the impact will be on the price or the volume, we don't know yet, because that depends on what will be the trigger. What will be the trigger to issue new allowances from that old MSR, and what will be the volume. And so, although some have a large outcry that it's softening in a heavy way, that really depends. It really depends. The only thing is the Commission is prepared the availability of the MSR, and potentially we will talk also about ETS 2 a little bit later. And there, exactly that is happening.
Because one thing that always strikes me is, so the market stability reserve is mostly one-way street, whereby they can remove allowances from the market, but it's not like, because Jos Baker raised the scenario where suddenly we might go to a scenario where there's a shortage of liquidity.
Yeah.
So suddenly, it gets really expensive to reduce emissions as we reduce the amount of emissions companies get. Is there a way to grant more allocation, like more permits? Because right now, the market stability reserve is to stabilize the price if the prices get too low and if the supply gets too high. Is there something else that if prices were to shoot up? Because I think even the fine of non-complying is €100. If we go above €100,
oh, it's a bit different. It works a bit different, and in the proposal, it will also get an extra function. It did not work as followed, that it will take allowances out of the market. It will just keep allowances in the stability reserve to auction less. So it's not taking away allowances from companies. Huh? It's just keeping it in the stock, in the budget, and auctioning less. So it's not taking it from the market, it's auctioning less. So that's first. And the objective was only good liquidity, whatever the price is. So the price was never a trigger. That was in Article 29. There's a special trigger. If the price within a short period is peaking very fast, then the European Commission can, together with member states, decide to issue more allowances from the reserve to keep the price
Okay.
down. But it has never been triggered because it was never that high that fast. So that tool was already there. But that was never used, as I said, and also it was pretty tightened the requirements to get this issuance. Now the new MSR function will be that after the price is higher than X, then maybe 400 million ton will be issued. Maybe that will be the rule. We don't know what the rule will be, what the price will be to get those issuance, and how much the volume. We don't know yet. So it will get a new function. The function was to control the liquidity, the volume, but now it will also be used to lower the price. At least that's the idea. But it's very complicated to do that because if you have more auctions, will companies buy those to hedge for the future? We don't know that. Huh? And there's still the power price. So it's very difficult to exactly control the price with issuing extra allowances. Maybe you have a big shock, okay, but if you have a long-term high price, how does that work? I'm not so sure. So, but this is one of the elements of the changes we will see, because in the past, many member states, I think more than 10 or even more, they have favored what they say a price corridor. So of course we need a good price, but maybe not too high, 500, not too low, €5. Let's have a corridor, a slowly increasing corridor, so that you have at least some kind of ceiling and a floor. And maybe the ceiling is 150, and maybe the floor is 40, right? So that at least and then if it goes to the floor, you issue less next year. If it goes over the ceiling, you issue more. And that kind of system is being used in California. And it's also a little bit how the ETS 2 works. But if you understand from how I say this, it's complicated. You don't know what will be the price.
Yeah.
It's always a result of demand and supply, but also in assumptions. Because sometimes I think I need to educate traders, because after the outcry of BASF and Merz and Italy, suddenly traders said, "Oh, let's give only a lower price." But I said, "Yeah, why? It's still a compliance mechanism. For all the emissions, you need to purchase allowances." So it's what the price in the end is very interesting, and so maybe that explains a bit. That explains a bit, hopefully, for the listeners that. At the moment, the MSR is only used to control the volume, to have a liquidity. And because the price of the CO2 allowances add cost for power and for industries, maybe let's have some check, some control of the overall price. But be careful what you say. But what is a good price? So maybe a wide corridor is the best there is, so that you have a predictable triggers for the and also for the volume of issuances after this is going to happen. Thanks.
So I think this is one big thing, because like you say, it's changing the nature of the market stability reserve
Very
from
much.
one controlling liquidity to making sure the prices move between a certain region. So in some sense, there's like a dichotomy: either you control the liquidity or you try to control the price, but they can get in tension with each other.
Exactly. It's complicated. The Commission is always saying, no, we don't want to control the price, we control the volume, that's it. Because if you have a good volume, a good cap, you meet your targets. And what the price is always uncertain. So maybe we will see a proposal like I just described. And as you understand, it's very complex. And if it will be effective, nobody knows. But at least you have something. The public is maybe happy, but if you have what you wanted, we don't know yet.
And do you
But it,
still feel that those member states, because you mentioned 10 member states were
at
maybe
least
pushing
in
for
favor
this,
of that.
do you still feel like this is the case? That
I
there's like
think
a push towards a corridor?
I think so. It has had no attention at all. Only the French now and then is discussing this. They did the same with ETS 2, for example. Um, I think it's also complicated for governments to decide what is a good price. Huh? Some say, in the general, the CO2 price should be very high. In the end, maybe €500. Huh? But yeah, in my view, companies will do the best to prevent those high prices by innovation, by changes. So in the end game, maybe the price is low, huh? Because then you have a good behavior. If the price is very high, it shows you don't do a good job. Yeah, literally. So what the price is complicated. So I expect that governments, they want to go home with, okay, we have a corridor, we have had it, and then we still need to check if it works. But at least you have something, you have a decision which looks interesting. And we have a similar kind of tool with the ETS2 to keep the price, at least in the beginning, a little bit lower. And in California, they also use this floor and ceiling price. So it might work. But nobody will be happy, of course, because what is a good price? Huh? And
It's a big political debate.
yeah, and who do you want to incentivize? And is it helping laggards or not? Yeah, so it really shows it's political. And indeed, the Commission is very reluctant in tackling prices. But in the meantime, we have maybe a little bit of a hybrid system, because half of the allowances is auctioned anyway. There is already a price. And yeah, if you follow the CBAM rules, there is a phase out of free allowances even, although this way might be revisited as well. So yeah, that's a difficulty, and it's political. So yeah, governments need to go home with proof. I have something realized. So shut up now. Let's be silent and work on.
Yeah. Maybe question is, you also mentioned the linear reduction factor. So that means the amount at which emissions decrease over time.
Yeah.
And the way I understood it is, but by 2039, there would be no more new emissions allowed,
Well, no,
or sold. So
no.
how much? So that's my understanding.
Be very detailed. No.
So first of all, is that correct? And then second, it seems maybe some proposal to soften this linear reduction factor.
Yeah. So the real detailed rule is, if you follow that line that was adopted several years ago, there will be no more new allowances available or issued after 2039. So not new allowances. That means there's still emissions are still allowed if you have bought and banked allowances, for example. There are also allowances still available after 2039 for aviation, for example, the new sectors. So there is still some budget, but the change I expect, and Peter Liese, the German MAP, proposed to change the reduction factor from 4.4% into 3.4%, for example. That means that after 2042 or 2043, there will be no more new allowances. Yeah, and that's reasonable, because that clearly softens the tightness a bit. It can soften the price a bit, and it's still pretty ambitious. It's still earlier than 2050 for no new allowances. So yeah, that's a good softening, and I think the current situation can justify that.
Exactly, because the goal is by 2050, but we've set this interim target by 2040, to have like the 90% reduction. So, and the way I heard it, so then let me rephrase it then
Mhm.
is exactly, there's no more new allowances, but you can still use the allowances you've banked from the past. So if I'm a rational company and I'm foreseeing this, I'm also trying to keep things in reserve so that when this comes along, I can smooth my path of emissions, so
Yeah,
to say.
yeah, of course, but that's a lot of money, and so it maybe helps you 1 or 2 years for some. You cannot save too much, of course. It's a lot of opportunity cost. But at least for a single company that needs some more time to maneuver, yeah, it's a good option, I think. Um, but as I said earlier, the linear reduction factor will be a little bit softened, I think. So there will be new allowances until 2042, for example. Huh? It's still stronger than the 90% reduction overall in the EU. huh? So it's more ambitious. And also allowances are no sorry also CO2 emissions can be captured or compensated with removals, for example, or with CCS or through Article 6 carbon credits. So this all shows that there is no rule that there will be no more emissions after 2039, but the new allowances will be ending soon after, and you can create new room for new emissions if you compensate that with CCS or carbon removals or Article 6.
And which then brings me to the point that we were, talking before we started. And you mentioned actually a really nice metaphor for the UTS as a docking station, which I think brings us to the broader point that it's not just the emission trading system, but the carbon border adjustment mechanism was introduced this year. There's talk about the EU emission trading system too, which then goes to more like including fuels. Maritime emissions are on there, like aviation emissions might be discussed. So could you just talk a little bit how you see the ecosystem of climate policy?
Yep. No, I often tell that the ETS, I see it as a docking station where you can plug in all kind of escape routes or innovative flexible mechanisms. You can link the ETS with Article 6. You can link it with European carbon removals. So, and then if you have a broader view on this, the ETS started with reducing the emissions from emissions to climate neutral. But in the future, this system might help the whole economy to get carbon positive or CO2 negative. So when we have now the MSR, the stability reserve with allowances to compensate emissions, in the future we will have an MSR with only removals, less allowances, but more removals to compensate. And then, you can see maybe already in front of you that you have a line from emissions down to zero, but then it will continue to negative. And since we have the ETS, which is distributing costs for all the companies involved, all companies that are producing and are making power, they need to have a CO2 permit. They have to buy allowances. Those are all the licenses to operate. So in the future, when the EU needs to be CO2 negative, all companies need to be CO2 negative. Climate neutral is not so super anymore because the power is in 2040 already CO2 neutral. Some industries will have residual emissions. Some industries will already be at nil or zero, or use bio-based carbon or direct air capture carbon. Then you don't have any emissions, but that will be not enough in the future. Future, the license to operate will be if you have an economy that needs to be CO2 negative. And of course, some will say, let the government do this. With taxpayer money, the government should then run around and buying removals globally. Well, we have already a great system to distribute costs and have it linked to a permit system. That's the ETS. So the ETS is now helping us from emissions to zero. In the future, it will help us to to get our whole economy carbon positive. That also will bring us in our mind that all industries need to be part of the ETS. Also, companies that has never had any emissions because they're only using agriculture products, for example. They have never had emissions, maybe waste, but they also need to be CO2 negative. So this shows that the ETS is here to stay. It's a good tool. It's an economic instrument. It's a permitting system. It can be linked to all kind of international and national removal systems. So yeah, why not keep on using this?
But
Also,
and on the one hand, then I think there wasn't possibility for the integration of the EU ETS too, but they did decide to keep that separate.
yeah, I think that's very good because ETS2 is an upstream system. You could say ETS2 is covering the scope 3 emissions of oil refineries. The refineries are ETS1, but the fuel that you burn in your car, that's scope 3 of that oil producer. And also the oil producer need to buy allowances for the emissions from burning fuel in your car. So it's a completely different system. And by adding this in the ETS, it is part of the whole cap, the whole budget. That's good. But yeah, the system plays out differently, because we need to prevent that car users pay a higher price for the allowances, while there's no effort reducing emissions. That's also not what you want.
But
So, or you need
is
to,
that true? Because it's like the whole point of, if you have higher prices, people should react to that by reducing their consumption.
yeah, that's true. But some cars need to be you need to use some cars for moving older persons or children or tools or beer, whatever. So yeah, the economy still uses some fuel, and if you're only if you keep on paying for it, you still have the emissions, and you want to get rid of the emissions. So the incentive should also go a little bit to the shells in this world that will have to buy those allowances. They should have an incentive to try to avoid those costs and make cleaner fuel. The EV cars need to be stimulated by governments and subsidies. The heat networks for government for cities need to
But you hear that they
so
need to be subsidized, but the EU ETS two should, in theory, create a leveling playing field between the gasoline cars and the
no,
electricity cars. Once
no,
you've
no, wait a minute.
priced,
No, wait a minute. I need to
oh,
add
sorry.
one thing. So this ETS2, this upstream system, requires what we call complementary measures. So there is a system to give a price on the emissions also in cars and in houses, but you need to be sure as governments to have enough subsidies for insulation of houses or public transportation. If you don't have that, then the consumer only pays higher cost. So you need to prepare those transitions, and that makes it complicated, because the ETS, it's up to the companies to make the reductions. But with buildings and transportation, it's more complicated. It's really working together. You need to players to change, but also you need to change the demand. And the demand can change through heat networks and public transportation in EVs. And if we don't have the complementary measures, um, yeah, the system will not work, because if you have no transition path, then you pay a high price and you still have the emissions. And you are right that in the long term there will be less use, but there will be have a crazy economy. We need to transition instead of yeah eating or have less mobility. And so that's why the ETS2 has this price control mechanism. So there will be front loading. There will be a huge MSR stability reserve in the beginning. So in the beginning, governments, companies, and consumers have a lot of time to prepare. So the price will be low because of these price control mechanisms. Um, that means if the price is higher than, let's say, 60 euro per ton, then more allowances will be issued. That will dampen the price. But of course, you cannot do that in eternity. So,
Yeah.
and that makes it difficult to predict when it can be linked to ETS one, because if it's linked to ETS one, well, then we will see even less investments
Yeah.
in art in ETS two sectors. So you need to keep it separately because of that reason. But also, yeah, it functions completely different.
And that also brings me to a point which I read from your point, is that they actually, I felt, if I understood it correctly, made it a bit more flexible on the elimination of gasoline cars in the recent amendment.
Yeah, you mean the car industry?
Yeah.
Yeah, that was a very interesting. Very, I really like flexibilities as long as you have still good impact on climate, and it's really so interesting that the Commission got this idea, and it could work. Because first it was the idea to stop the production and distribution of combustion cars in 2040 or something like that. But now it's up to 90%. So 10% can still be combustion cars, but then we need to use more green steel. And indeed, if that works well, if the cars are greener, indeed, the economy has seen less emissions, and that could work. And I really like that, because that means the Commission, the EU, is still worried about the climate problem. So the overall emissions need to go down, But yeah, if this gives the industry more time for flexibility, and still the Scanias in the world that have cleaner cars already much earlier, they still get the rewards. But yeah, there's just more room to maneuver for the others. And if you look at the current geopolitics, yeah, the power prices are complicated. Industries has complexities. So yeah, this kind of flexibility, which pushes green steel, is a very interesting angle. You
And
shouldn't go too
when
far,
you
but
say green steel, do you mean like steel that's produced with less carbon emissions?
yeah,
Yeah.
exactly, or bio-based or recycled. Yeah, that's interesting. So that helps innovation because those car producers they need to get their hand on that green steel, huh? And so industry that make that are that have this advantage to get on the market. And that's a kind of interesting flexibility. You see, flexibility always brings something good as well.
Yeah.
It's not only bad, it brings also something you would also want anyway. And I like this. I gotta think of the commission. And also the industry also likes it because okay, you get more room to maneuver, but we need to meet the carbon. We need to meet the climate goals anyway, and that's also what you see in the ETS. The overall goal is still there, still ambitious, with just some more flexibility.
And I think that's what I'm getting from you, because I'm following you on LinkedIn. Um, is a lot of people say anytime anything is proposed. So I'm over exaggerating for the point of making an
Yeah,
example, but it's like, oh, we're weakening the climate
yeah,
targets. And I think what you're sometimes bringing is an argument that we're not weakening the targets. There's just we're bringing in a little bit more flexibility on how we reach them. There's a point at which previous legislation might have been too inflexible.
yeah,
Yeah,
exactly.
it's sometimes people act as if prior legislation was somehow the best legislation in the
Yeah,
world, and
good.
everything was just genius. But
Mhm.
there maybe there's some more room for flexibility or doing it things in a different way. So
Flexibility after reflection,
yeah,
right?
flexibility after reflection, exactly.
Yeah, and what I really like about the ETS, it serves all kind of objectives. So some industry think, okay, CCS will be free because we have a CO2 price.
Yeah, CCS being carbon capture storage,
Yeah,
just
for example.
yeah.
But yeah, if you meet your CO2 target differently, yeah, then we don't need CCS. So you don't know exactly how it will be used. That's interesting. Let's take another topic, the benchmarks. Yeah. We heard some recent leakage news about the new benchmarks. So the CO2 benchmarks are the tool to base as a basis for the allocation of free allowances. Huh? So if you produce steel, for example, you tell the authorities how much steel you produce, and then you get X ton of free allowances per X ton of produced steel, and that benchmark is set at the emissions of the 10% best performing industries in that sector. But it was not a norm, it's not a rule. You can still have all the emissions you want as long as you buy allowances. But some see this benchmark because the benchmark is tightening over time, because technology is improving, or you just want to tighten it and tighten the allocation of free allowances. But it has never been a rule. So at the moment, the Commission proposed new benchmarks for the next period from 2026 to 2030. Uh, you see refineries is a little bit weaker, it looks like, and the others are a little bit tightened, but not too much. Um, but what does it mean? It only means if the benchmark is a little bit softer, yeah, you get maybe more free allowances, but the allowances are still in the budget. So you still will meet your target because there's not much more allowances than you need to meet your target. But the amount of free allowances will be bigger or will remain big, and that's fine. So, so some say it's bad if benchmarks are not strengthened enough because it does not help us with transitioning. Yeah, that's true. But yeah, if you can have some more time for your transition, still meeting your CO2 target, yeah, I'm fine with it. And still, some companies will move their transition faster, other will be slower. But as I said earlier, it has never been a rule. It was more like a formula to allocate it. And you have to think about the following: it's 10% best performing, right? So 90% is performing less
Worse.
efficient. Yeah. And there's always the incentive: the more efficient you produce, the less you have to buy. That incentive remains there. So you see, if you don't look back on what was the purpose of the benchmark, a formula to allocate free allowances, yeah, then you lose this reality. And indeed, now we reflect this, we think, maybe it's better if we look at the overall cost of industries to keep the amount of free allowances a little bit longer or larger.
I think it's a good point exactly with the benchmark because a lot of people immediately go to that. That all when you say benchmark, I also then think of the new carbon border adjustment mechanism, which has been introduced, um, which has also ties to the European emission trading system, as it was designed to phase out free emissions to sectors at risk. And then the idea is to phase out those free allocations as the carbon border adjustment mechanism ramps up. But now it seems like there's might be this tension where the speed of the carbon border adjustment mechanism potentially being unknown and then the phase out. So what is your read on that at the moment?
Yeah. No, that's exactly a very good point. Um, you said clearly sectors at risk. So why would you get higher costs for sectors at risk? You see, and that's the interesting irony. We all see that the overall climate policy for European industries is stronger than in the US or in Japan or China. We already know that. So, and that I think for me already safeguards a border adjustment. Maybe not a very high price, but at least we can have some border adjustments also on the current situation. So you don't need to first get rid of your free allowances. Huh? Um, and that was what Diederik Samson said several years ago. He said, well, we not just want level playing field, we want a higher level playing field. So have it more expensive for everybody. Huh? But that then you have the assumption that if you don't do that, you can't have a border adjustment. And that's not true. That's not rational. So I've always been against that logic that you first have to get rid of free allowances. Otherwise, you are not allowed to have a border tax adjustment. But you can always have a border tax adjustment as long as you treat the domestic industries and importers same. Yeah? And as I said earlier, we all know that our trading partners have less ambition on climate policy. So that safeguards already some kind of border tax. You need to treat both the same way. So that logic to get rid of free allowances, I'm very critical about that, and that's why.
But is it not the idea to phase it out at the same time
Yes, as the
as
importer.
the increase in the carbon, so that you would increase, like you say, you would raise the playing field
Yes, but why would you need to raise?
simultaneously for the industries at risk as for the domestic firms?
Well, but then you, but the idea is that apparently we don't have enough cost in Europe that safeguards any border tax adjustment, and that's not true. The current climate policy for European industries is already pretty tough. Everybody has to buy extra. They're tightening. They have energy efficiency improvement requirements. There is already a lot going on. Now, and if you calculate that, you can put it as a price on the importers. You don't need to get rid of your free allowances for that, because then you first create problems for European industries, higher cost, and then look at the current situation where there's a tariff war everywhere. So the carbon tax adjustment is not even seen in the complex circus of tariffs. Huh? And the risk is that you have higher costs for European industries, and the importers are transporting their goods other regions, for example. So with their emissions, and I will always was a favor of a more positive way of cooperation. That was also what the Germans wanted years ago. They want a kind of climate club, that they say, well, all G20 industries should work together in transition and maybe have cap and trade systems amongst each others instead of this carbon border tax adjustment. But now it's there. But as I said earlier, in the carbon package for 2040, the Commission is asked to consider to delay the phase out of free allowances because of the current situation, right? And I don't think it hurts the climate because you have still the same cap. And it improves the global atmosphere a little bit because especially developing countries don't like these high prices for their export into the EU. Although I have to say it helped governments to move towards ETS systems. Turkey is implementing it. China already had it. So more and more countries, they think, okay, how can we avoid CBAM tariff by our own ETS? So that works. Um, and that also helps level playing field. But I think it's too risky to bring our industries on higher costs. On the hope it will help keep the dumping of steel out of the EU, and I think that's not what I expect.
Okay. Um, and one thing I also agree with is we already have very strong regulations on nearly every front. So,
So I think so. Yeah. Yeah.
it's we already have the highest standards there. So,
I understand it was complex because for aluminum and steel, the Commission said, "Okay, guys, you're vulnerable. We can help you. We get a border tax for everybody, but then you have to accept phase out the freelance." Okay, let's do that. Sounds acceptable, huh? And that's why they agreed. But now they think, not a good idea. There are so many tariffs and there's so much dumping that it's not enough to to get our own cost higher already, and then have this carbon border tax adjustment. So yeah, think again. And I think it's good that in the commission, in the 2040 package, the commission's asked, please delay that phasing out at least for now.
and there may be one topic we haven't covered yet is the extension to, or the recent extension to aviation and maritime emissions, which is kind of a new. Could you just speak to what the situation is there? Because I don't think this is probably on many people's radar,
Yeah,
but it is. I feel like part of going to be of the upcoming discussions, or already is.
yeah, a a little bit. I think the aviation, the intra-European aviation emissions were already included in the ETS several years. They started with a lot of free allowances, but as of this year, there are no more free allowances for airlines. So airlines, they have to buy allowances for all the emissions they emit by flying. It is an increasing sector. That's not good, I know, but it's still just 5% of overall emissions in the ETS, and they're in that budget, so that's good. But we also need to push soft. We need to have other regulations. So aviation is in there. The topic on aviation will be, if you look at the global emissions of aviation, and that is being run by ICAO, the United Nations Treaty on Civil Aviation. They have only an offset mechanism for growth, so they want to have climate neutral growth, and the emissions that are increasing compared to years before, those need to be compensated with offsets. Right? And we in the EU, we see it as a very weak system. It's not ambitious enough. So the Commission will also review the CORSIA system. If it's ambitious enough, maybe we need to include also the international emissions under ETS. But yeah, that will create another trade war, I'm afraid. So if that's helpful, maybe only for 50%, that might be an idea. Because if you discuss the shipping, also the European shipping emissions are included in ETS. That was recent. And half of the international shipping emissions. So if you go with a cruise ship from New York to Europe and go back, then only half of the emissions are part of the ETS. So you could say, well, the European ships that go to the US, we need to pay for those. And if the US ship goes to Europe, that's not a part of the ETS for shipping. Maybe a similar approach help the aviation. That could be. So that's under discussion. But within the European Union, it works pretty good. The container shipping companies like Maersk, they already implement the CO2 price in their price, and also the passenger ships are also include those CO2 price. So that works pretty good, and that helps, I think, Maersk to prepare ships on ammonia, things like that. So it's this shows that the ETS family is growing and growing and growing. It's for governments a very preferred system because with one autograph, you might say, you meet your target for those sectors because you have only that amount of allowances available in order to meet your target.
Exactly. I think that's the big advantage of the system. Exactly. It's just inherently um, a theme, I think, of our conversation. Once you've set the targets and you've got an ETS and you can get there, then you'll get there. Then having some flexibility is might be good because then you have some then you have some leeway to act. Yes, I also want to be mindful of our time because you've already been very gracious with it. Is there something we haven't talked about or something you see in the discourse that you would still like to address? Like, I feel like you probably see a lot of comments. Is there
Yeah,
I shouldn't ask multiple questions in the same question, but I did it anyway. But what Diana do you see as like a misconception about policy, like the one that you see just all the time?
yeah. The misconception is, for example, that the price should be high, that companies need to pay. Well, companies need to comply and meet the climate ambition, because all the amounts they pay, you and me need to pay. So that is not necessary. So that's one. And then, yeah, I hope people will understand ETS a little bit more, trust a little bit more, because we really need it in the future. The budget is tightening and tightening and tightening. It's covering more and more sectors. So if we don't believe it, if we don't trust it, yeah, that's risky, because then governments will have their own taxation, own tools, whatever. So we need to have more understanding, and your podcast helps. That's the second. And the third thing is, we're now going to try new things. The European carbon removals. We're going to try the global carbon credits, but we will not link those immediately, directly. So a European steel company doesn't need to go as a cowboy globally to look for removals or for credits. I think we will first see an indirect linking. That means the Commission or European Investment Bank or governments, they will pay through auction revenues, for example, the first purchase of European carbon removals and international carbon credits, so that we can control the quality and we can monitor, we can control the volume, so how much is accessible for the ETS, and the price, because those removals will be more expensive than the ETS price. So you need to have some additional, yeah, public-private finance or subsidy to get that, to make it useful for the ETS. And so indirect linking, I think, has to be the buzzword. And so all the buts, all the comments, all the safeguards, all the problems we see is part of the indirect linkage. In that indirect linkage phase, you can try all kind of monitoring tools. You can look at those projects, what's good, what's not good. You have to learn from that, because you can't go without removals. So this is a very good testing zone, and the ETS is the compliance market that is pushing it. There's a need for removals, so that define the compliance. Where's the demand? The demand is there, and with the indirect linking through buyers clubs and things like that, you can control, as I said, quality, volume, and price.
Awesome. I hope exactly like you say that this podcast and your explanations can help also people understand better more what the ETS is, the linkages, why they're important, the target. So thanks so much for taking the time, Jos. I really appreciate it.
ETS is docking station. Thanks, Arvid.
Thank you.